we're here for the deep. We are. And therefore, one of the hardest things for us is to feel misunderstood because that keeps us at the shallow. And so if someone really gets us, then we feel like it's worthwhile, right? And so I find that that's where using terms and then defining the terms, that's the second piece, so people understand what it is. Like I'm constantly educating on what an introvert is, or educating on what a sensitive is, or educating on what an empath is. I don't just throw it out there because everyone has their own definition, but it allows us to go deep and to have conversations around it and to make meaning of things. But that's what we're here for.
Hello, and welcome to episode 112 of the Quiet and Strong podcast, especially for introverts. I'm your host, David Hall, and the creator of quietandstrong.com. This is a weekly podcast dedicated to understanding the strengths and needs of introverts. Introversion is not something to fix, but to be embraced. Normally, we'll air each episode on a Monday. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform. Leave a review. That would mean a lot to me. Tell a friend about the podcast and help get the word out there that introversion is a beautiful thing. Jessi Michel Agadoni is a sensitive health guide. Her purpose is to help introverts, empaths, and natural sensitives cultivate success without succumbing to constant overwhelm, anxiety, depression, autoimmunity, or any other body imbalance that could prevent them from having the impact they are called to have on this world. Her practice, Maryfloor Wellness, and unique authentic calm method teach natural sensitives how to rebuild their calm and resiliency to create sustainable health. She deeply believes that if all tender spirits live in alignment, the world will be a much more beautiful and peaceful place. All right. Well, I'm excited to welcome my guest, Jessi. Jessi, welcome to the Quiet and Strong podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
All right. Well, we're going to get into the great work that you do. But first, I'd like to hear about you and, how you came to understand that you were an introvert, a highly sensitive person, and also empath, and how you embraced all of that.
The big story.
Yeah.
Yes. So I always knew I was different. From a very young age, my parents, communicated back to me. They gave me feedback, both consciously and subconsciously, that I was different, that I saw the world and experienced it in a way that didn't match theirs. And so I didn't have labels for that. I didn't have a term for that. I just knew that I wasn't the same. And so I learned early on to chameleon and to just become what everyone else told me I should be. And I lived the way that others lived because I didn't trust what my body told me because it was apparently wrong or too emotional or too dramatic, or I was too sensitive, right? And back then, that term was used with a negative undertone. It wasn't a positive label to receive. So I knew that I was sensitive, but again, not in like the way that I understand it today. As I got older, I thought I was an extrovert, and my family is very extroverted. So they really encouraged that. And I grew up in a culture, I grew up doing theater, like all the things that you would expect an extrovert to do. But I would just get so tired, David, like so exhausted. And I just remember asking myself, especially in high school, how do these people keep going? Like, how are they constantly like, even just, I hang out with friends and then they want to get together again the very next day. And I was like, how are they doing this? What's wrong with me? And so I started I always had that narrative in the back of me of like, something's wrong with me. I don't know what it is, and I just felt exhausted all the time. By the time I reached college, I was so burnt out. Like from a physical health standpoint, my adrenals were just totally had lacked capacity. My hormones were a wreck. I was just had nothing to give. I was so drained. And as a result, my body started showing all these symptoms and all these diagnoses started getting thrown on me. But I still didn't really understand. I just thought it was, now I know that I'm sick. So that's why I'm so tired. Right. And then cue my husband, we met and he is 100% an introvert,
Okay.
comes from a family of introverts that know it, claim it, love it, honor it. And so he grew up in a very different lifestyle. And at first, to be honest, because of the way that I had been raised, I sort of like picked on him for it. Like it was, sometimes when something's triggering to you and you need to see it, you almost get defensive. Well, that's what happened. I got very defensive and I was like, we need to like socialize more, get out more. And he was like, no, I don't want to. That makes me tired. And I was like, what? What? You can do that? You can just say no? And so, I loved him and we connected off the bat and we're just the best of friends. And so when we did get married and we built a life together and like a social life together, I would get so frustrated with him in like the first 6 months of our marriage because he just like wouldn't go out, He just wanted to stay home all the time. And I didn't understand. And then one day I just said, fine. And I just embraced it. And then I realized, oh, this is heaven. This is the best thing
Wow, yeah,
I've ever experienced. I was like, this is amazing. I can say no. And I felt so much energy return. Even though I still had all these health problems, I had a lot of energy return. I had a lot of brain clarity come forward. I felt better, even without making any other shifts. And so I started to realize, oh, maybe I'm an introvert. How odd. And then I don't remember where, David, but I somehow learned what I would call the real definition of an introvert. Because I, just like most people, assumed being an introvert meant that you hated people, meant that you were just kind of a hermit and like a quote unquote loser or loner or whatever. And that's not what an introvert is at all, which obviously that. So to find out that the difference between extroversion and introversion had to do with capacity, had to do with energy and how you're filled up and how you are rejuvenated, I was like, oh, well, if that's all that it is, then I'm 100% an introvert, like no question. Because for me, I appear as an extrovert because when I'm around people, I do love it. Like I live off relationships. Like I love talking to people. I have no problem being in social settings. But I am so drained afterwards. Like I will go and I'll be the life of the party, but then I'll get home and you won't see me for a month. Like you won't see me for 4 weeks because I will just be so tired and so exhausted that I'll have to rejuvenate, and maybe that's an extreme example, but it's not far off. I live most of my life, like I work alone in my house all day and I love it. Like I love being alone so much. And I used to be afraid to say that, but now I'm not. I'm like, anytime anyone asks me, they're like, oh, don't you like want to have kids or want to have friends over? And I'm like, occasionally, but most of the time I just love being alone. I feel so good. I feel so full. And I love meeting and engaging with people when my cup is full. I don't like meeting with people when I have nothing to give. And that's really what happens for me. So I really learned about introversion through my husband. I like praise God for him because I would have never embraced that. And he showed me that it was a healthy, very viable lifestyle, and obviously there's so many things rolled into that. I was, massively codependent and all those other things as well that kind of created who I was at the time. And so there's a lot of healing that happened out of embracing my introversion. And then as far as like recognizing being an empath and being what's known as a highly sensitive person, or what I call a natural sensitive, those things came a little bit later. So for me, I found out about Dr. Elaine Aron's term of highly sensitive person through her book. And that was when I really hit rock bottom. And that was in 2016. I was working at a digital marketing agency and doing the whole open concept office, really high intense work, really an introvert's nightmare.
Yeah.
I hadn't fully learned apparently. And I just crashed and burned after 8 months. Like I ate it hard. And I ended up taking basically a year off from like my scheduled typical work. And in that time frame, I came across her work and it just shifted my whole life when I started to realize, oh, I'm not just an introvert. There's this whole other piece of me as well. I have this sensory processing sensitivity trait that means that I receive 20 pieces of information when I walk into a room as opposed to 10 pieces of information that everyone else sees. Like I'm processing so much more. And that's that plus my introversion. And that maybe even be contributing to my introversion, right? So that really has been a big wake up call for me. And I've lived my life according to honoring that going forward. And my health has seen huge rebounds because of it. And then as far as empathy, I kind of define empathy a little bit differently than I think a lot of people do. I see an empath as someone that is born with the natural gifting of empathy, meaning that it's just subconscious. It's not something they even have to really try at. And in fact, they usually have to learn how to have boundaries with it, how to rein it in. And then I think there's the skill of empathy that anyone can learn. And I think every human should have that skill. And some of us are better at developing it than others. For some, it's easier than others. There's a spectrum, right? But an empath is someone that will never not have it. Whereas someone that just has the gift of empathy, they can fully not turn it on. Like they literally have to like flip a switch to bring it into their life. And it's a choice versus like innate trait. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, and I think there are some ways that it manifests for you or other empaths differently.
Yeah,
When we were
totally.
talking before, it's like I'm a very analytical person, and so
Yeah.
my empathy is going to come from more of a thinking space, and
Yeah.
where I'm not going to have the same gift of feeling it like you are, and I don't know why we each have different gifts, but I can have empathy, but it's going to look and feel differently than you do. But that doesn't mean I don't care. I care deeply. It's just going to
Yeah.
manifest itself different.
And that's such a good addition because I would still say, David, that you can be an empath and not necessarily be able to put yourself in everyone's heart, but you can put yourself in everyone's mind, right?
Yeah,
Because that's
yeah.
really what an empath and even the skill of empathy is the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And
Hmm.
we all are able to do it in specific ways a little bit more strongly. Like for me, I don't know if you're familiar with human design at all, but that's like a whole nother conversation. But it's just a way to kind of know where you're naturally more gifted at empathy. And for me, I'm really good actually at knowing the body. So I can put myself into someone else's physical body and know how something feels. Like, so for example, me watching a movie where someone gets stabbed is like horrifying for me because I literally experienced that. Whereas, like for you, you know how people think. And so, if someone's ruminating and have these thoughts in their mind, like you have so much empathy for that because you get it and you can literally experience that. So I think, it's something again that can be innate or developed. Either way, it's always expressed uniquely because we're all so different, right? Even if we have these labels of introvert, natural sensitive, highly sensitive empath, it doesn't mean that we're the same. There's so many layers to who we are as people, right?
Yeah, that's for sure. And that's what I always say too. It's helpful to describe these labels because we can learn from each other. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, nobody is exactly the same. We're pretty complex people, there's lots of nuances, but it's helpful to describe, but it's not to
Mhm.
box you in. It's just to help you understand.
Exactly, because then you can expand beyond it. But it's so helpful to have language to communicate.
Yeah, so thanks so much for sharing your story. And introverts are deep thinkers or deep feelers, and that's where we need some of the recharge or time alone to do things. Like that's where
Mhm.
the open office plan doesn't work because we're
Right.
deep thinkers and we need that time to focus and do our best work. I'm also really happy that your husband kind of helped you. We talked before. Tell me what you told me that he's not draining to you. Tell us about that.
No, yeah, he is not, which I would say I think he's the only person, David, like in this world,
Okay.
which is why I was like, he's my soulmate. Is I can be alone with him in my house and I don't feel like his presence doesn't pull from me. We can be in the same room, we can be doing stuff side by side and not have to engage, right? Which I think is very common amongst introverts. We can just kind of move through our lives without having to constantly be talking and things like that. But even still, just sometimes there's certain people that, I mean, bless them, but they can just be sitting. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so stressed out just having you here because I can feel my energy getting pulled towards you. And I think that has a lot to do, though, with someone being really comfortable with who they are. Like he's very confident, he's very grounded. We were comparing our partners, of like he just knows who he is and he has no problem just being that. And I think for me, as someone that comes from a history of codependency and enmeshment and all these things, to be around someone that doesn't need me in that way, doesn't like require me to be whole, it allows me a lot of freedom. It allows me to truly just rest because I don't have to caretake. And I think, especially if you're an introvert that would identify with being an empath or has really high strength with empathy, we constantly feel like we have to carry the lives of others. We constantly are pulled in. If we're not setting up boundaries, it's almost more effort to set up boundaries than to just like let everything merge, right? That's the term I use a lot. If I'm not actively establishing boundaries with people that are draining, I just merge with them. It just happens. So it is an active choice. And that takes effort. That takes a lot of time. That takes a lot of energy. And so when I'm around people that I have to really hold that boundary, I'm so drained. But with my husband, I don't. I don't have to do that.
Yeah.
And it's just so beautiful. It's really, really refreshing.
Was he always confident as an introvert?
He would say no.
Okay. He
Um,
had to kind of embrace it too.
he did. Yeah, he did. And not that this, and we've talked about this, these are two different things. He was a shy introvert, right? So he developed shyness. And that was because I think he was made fun of for being an introvert. He was bullied a lot in school and had some pretty intense experiences. So he had to overcome those. And I would say he's still overcoming that, like we all are. But because he grew up in a family of two parents that were introverts and knew it and lived accordingly, he grew up in a safe space where it was normal to take a nap. It was normal to not be doing 20 million activities in a day. It was normal to rest on vacation. It was normal to uh, just not have to constantly be engaging with people. Whereas my family, it was like it was never quiet. There's always music playing. There's always someone at the house. We were always going to another activity. There's just constant activity. And I had parents that didn't know how to sit still, didn't know how to be alone with themselves, where his parents like thrive on that. So I think that really helped establish him, even though there were still things, and he would say even now, still things that he's, embracing and appreciating about his introversion. He had that solid base. And I think that really shows, we're like two case studies, the
Yeah. Yeah.
difference
You
of
know,
how childhood really shapes you.
yeah. And introversion isn't shyness, but I think in his case, and I know this was the case for me,
Mm,
it caused me to be shy because I
yes.
didn't understand it.
Right.
And as soon as I understood, oh, I'm a deep thinker. I'm going to need time to think. I might pause in conversations. I might need time to be alone. This is all good. I might have some crazy deep thoughts that no one else has ever thought of before. And that's all great. And so once I understood that, then my shyness went away and I'm not shy, and
Mm,
that helped me gain confidence. And, like with my wife, she's a fellow introvert and she's just always been confident. But that's good for me to see that we're
yeah.
not all going through that journey where we felt like something was wrong. Of course, anybody that is, there's nothing wrong with you. And that's why we do this show. That's why we have great people like Jessi on. There's nothing wrong with you. You just need to
Yeah.
get to know yourself. And that's a great thing.
Mm. Yeah. And it's funny too, because out of the two of us, he grew up in an introverted family and he developed shyness where I didn't. And I'm very social and most people would label me as an extrovert if they just met me. But it's all deceiving because at the core, we're the same.
Yeah, they don't see
So
what's going
funny.
on inside. You don't see someone's
Exactly.
preferences. You don't see someone's deep thoughts, deep emotions. You don't see all of that.
Mm-mm.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
so being sensitive, you like to say naturally sensitive, right?
Yes.
Or being an empath, those could be for an introvert or extrovert. Maybe we talk a little bit about the overlap. I think more
Yeah.
likely for an introvert than not, but extroverts can definitely be empaths and sensitive as well, right?
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, I work with sensitives, so I get to see the gamut. I feel like I have a very privileged position where I really get to know and work intimately with a lot of sensitives. And so, Oftentimes, I will say most natural sensitives are introverted and empaths, but it's not always the case. And I would say, like, empathy is a big thing right now. A lot of people are, ascribing to the term empath, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be introverted or sensitive. Like, those are two very different things. And again, you can have deep empathy and not be an empath, right? So there's all these little nuances. And again, these are my rules. Like, I'm definitely making my own rules here, and some of them others would agree with me and maybe not. It doesn't matter, but it's all language in the end of the day. But I think as far as like what really matters is knowing who you are. And then if you feel like a label matches that and will help you communicate it, that's where it becomes helpful and important. So I actually have a decent amount of clients that are introverts, but they swear on their lives that they're extroverts. And it comes down to this myth that introverts are not people, which is the biggest lie ever. I find that introverts are the most deep, profound, meaningful relators. And it's just all about quantity, And so I think there is almost this hesitation because, 50% of the population are introverts. So it's very likely that every other person you meet is a fellow introvert. So I do see a lot of clients that hesitate. They'll embrace the sensitivity label, they'll embrace the empath label, but they really hesitate on the introvert label because of kind of the cultural negativity around that term. But again, everyone's different. For me, it was harder to embrace the sensitivity label because I grew up in an environment that really saw that as weakness, really saw that as being less than. So an introversion, wasn't encouraged either, but it was a whole different experience there. So, but there's overlap, but they are all different. And so you can have one and not have any of the others. And I think it's helpful to know that.
Yeah. And on the introversion, you spend more time focusing inwardly than not, you know?
Yes.
There's some telltale signs for you. If we're talking and sometimes you need to pause and think about something, that's probably you're an introvert. Extroverts tend to speak in order to think. That's something. You said you like talking with everybody, but when we were talking before, I asked you about that and I said, well, do you like small talk? And you said no.
I hate small
You want
talk.
to get right into the deep stuff, just like
Yeah.
I do. And,
Yeah.
conversations like this that we're passionate about, we love talking about, but we may not like other small topics.
That's a good differentiation. Yeah. And I think that's where I really, when we start to get into the nuances of it, I'm the person that comes to the party and within 2 minutes of talking to me, we're talking about something you've never told anyone before.
Yeah, see?
You're walking away, like learning new information. Usually we're talking about your deepest fears or something that's super meaningful to you. Like when I have conversations, they're never shallow. And that some people love that, some people don't. My fellow introverts love it. And even my extroverted friends that are open and willing to learn and appreciate the gifting of the introvert to bring them into the deep. Because I do have extroverted friends that they value that because they have a hard time going there. And they'll tell me sometimes, Jess, I'm not, because it's exhausting for them to go deep. Whereas for us introverts, it's actually energizing. Like after this conversation, I'm going to be pumped up and energized. Whereas if I had to go to a party and talk small talk, I'd be so exhausted. But for the extrovert, it's different. For them, going and doing the shallow talk, being like, well, how's your kid? Blah, blah, blah. They love that. That gives them energy. But having to sit down with Jessi and share the deep part of their soul, that drains them. And they're like, I'll see you in a month. Like, you're just a lot, which it's not bad, but it's just different.
Yeah. I love that you said that because I was thinking the exact same thing. I don't like the simple definition that when people say, oh, introverts are drained by people. I hate that because it's not true. We can
Yeah.
get quite energized by the right conversation. So I always say we can be drained by certain situations and certain
Mm-hmm.
people.
Yes.
But the right conversation can be quite energizing. And that's something that's really important to remember. It just depends. And I think we definitely generalize too much.
Yeah, and that's human nature, right? We're trying to find similarities because ultimately we all want to connect. We all want to feel loved and accepted. And so we're trying to put ourselves out there so people can get to know us, especially as introverts. We want to be known at the depths of the depths. We're here for the deep. We are. And therefore, one of the hardest things for us is to feel misunderstood because that keeps us at the shallow. And so if someone really gets us, then we feel like it's worthwhile, right? And so I find that that's where using terms and then defining the terms, that's the second piece, so people understand what it is. Like I'm constantly educating on what an introvert is, or educating on what a sensitive is, or educating on what an empath is. I don't just throw it out there because everyone has their own definition, but it allows us to go deep and to have conversations around it and to make meaning of things. But that's what we're here for. Like introversion is a gifting, right? And so, like, we are here to bring the deep everywhere we go, whether people like it or not. And it's the balance of society. If we were all, enjoying the more playful, energetic things in life, not that we don't enjoy that too, but if that's all we were, we'd have a lot of problems as humans. But vice versa, if we were always in the deep, we would never play. We would never
Right.
lighten up and float. And so we really need both. And I think that's true even as introverts. Sometimes we can be like, oh, those extroverts, blah, 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 la, la, la,
Yeah.
they're so shallow. But they're really just beautiful, light souls, that thank goodness for them because they often are the ones that have to do really hard things that we as deep introverts just aren't here to do. So we really need both. It's important to have both. And I think whether you're an extrovert or an introvert, you need to learn to respect the other, right? It's everyone has value regardless of your giftings, regardless of your traits. Like we're all needed. We're all just pieces in the big puzzle of life.
I love how you're saying this. Let's get more specific. Like, what is a gift that you feel like you have because of that you're an introvert or sensitive or an empath? What's a gift or two that, or even something that you've seen in somebody else?
Yeah. I'm trying to think of something I haven't said yet. Um,
'Cause that's part of
ah,
this whole conversation
I
is,
know.
it's what here's what we need, but
Yeah.
here's why we need it because we're able to have these gifts that we bring that you just so beautifully said right now.
Yeah, I feel like, and this one falls a little bit more into the sensitivity camp, but I would
Okay.
say it applies to probably all of the labels. And that would be I feel like we're here to be the canary in the coal mine. And another term I would use is to be the scout, that we're here to enter into environments and to pick up a lot more information than the average individual. If you have the sensory processing sensitivity trait, like you are a natural sensitive, a highly sensitive person, you will physically gather more information from all experiences. And that is a gifting, but it's not here to just overwhelm you. It's here to inform the rest of humankind because you are here to be that scout, to call out. I work in the health world. So for me, I can walk into a room and tell you if there's mold, like instantaneously. And that is because I'm just very sensitive. That's one of the things I can pick up on. Whereas everyone else in the room thinks they're fine, no problem. But that mold is impacting every single person in that room, whether they're aware of it or not. But because I'm in the room, I can say, hey guys, this isn't a safe environment. We need to get an air filter in here or we need to leave. And that is a benefit to everyone in that room, right? That's a health example. There's so many other examples, of even emotionally, like we were talking about our different empathic giftings. Like I am really good at sensing people's fears and being able to really know them and even to the physical body level. And so I can sense that for someone and say, we need to not watch this movie, or we need to go somewhere else, or we need to change the subject because I can sense better than they can what's happening in their body. I can sense them going into fight and flight, and I can also feel it physically. My body's responding as well because I'm being an empath. And so I can say, hey, let's change the subject. This seems like something that's putting you into a state of alarm. And they have no concept of that because that's not their gifting, but I am saving their body. I'm helping them move out of that. And of course, there's so many other examples I could give, but our ability to pick up information, and then specifically as an introvert, our ability to process at a really deep level is for that reason, so that we can turn around and serve. It's not just for us to hoard, right? It's not just for us to live in fear or for us to feel overwhelmed. Like that is often the case if we're not, using it in a healthful manner and we haven't built healthy boundaries or healed our body of what I call developed sensitivities. And we're overloaded, we're drowning, basically. If we're drowning, then we can't turn around and help. And so I think it's important that we recognize that we do have a duty to heal ourselves so that we can be the gift that we're meant to be in this lifetime. We can't have the impact that we were created to have if we're drowning in our own overwhelm, fear, health issues, whatever it is that you're facing. And we all have our own journeys to move through, right? So, and I can explain that further if you'd like, but I call that developed sensitivity. And developed sensitivities are trauma, any sort of health imbalance, all those kinds of things that come in and shift and change who we are, that take away from our authenticity, don't allow us to be who we were created to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I feel like we are here to have such a huge role, especially in this lifetime, especially in this modern time. There is a shift right now. I think since kind of the pandemic, COVID-19, there's been an awakening of introverts, people that got to stay home. They're like, oh, this is life-giving.
Mm.
Having a quieter schedule, actually, I feel healthier. I'm a better mom. I'm a better partner. I'm working better. Like, this is really good for me. Working from home is so wonderful. And there's just this awakening of, oh, maybe I need more of this. Whether they are willing to ascribe to the label of introvert or not, they're embracing an introverted lifestyle, right? And saying, I'm actually going to clear house and do less. And I feel more revived by that. Having more alone time, having more quiet downtime, having the ability to let my mind actually process the information it's receiving. So it's not just overwhelmed all the time. Because I think of our brains like libraries, like we're taking in all this information, but then we need to like file it, stamp it, put it in the right section, like label it, all of that. If we don't do that, that's what leads to overwhelm. I actually had a sensitive researcher on my podcast, and we had a long discussion about how there's a lot of research on specifically sensitives, but I would see this in introverts as well, that if we don't take the time to do that filing process I just described with all the information we have, that is what leads to massive overwhelm. That is what leads to us feeling like we're drowning, and not being able to share our gifting of depth, our gifting of being that call out, that canary, that scout. So, and I know it also takes a lot of courage and a lot of confidence to verbalize, because it'll often be you expressing what you need when really it's benefiting everyone, even though they can't see it or feel it, right? Because we kind of sometimes see at like a 40 level, and extroverts are those, especially those that aren't sensitive or not on the high sensitivity spectrum, they don't see it. So they think you're lying or making it up, because they're like, if I don't see it, then either I'm blind or you're crazy. Like,
Right. Right.
which is like, no, it's
Yeah.
neither. It's just, I have a gifting that allows me to see more information, allows me to pick up on more, allows me to process more. And it doesn't make me better than you. You have other giftings that I don't have. But you need to believe me in this, because I have this gifting in order to save you, to serve you, to bless you. So let me do that. Right.
And that's a big piece of this, is there's not good or bad. We need
Right.
them all, right?
Yes.
And it is frustrating when someone doesn't understand the gift that you have. And that's why we're having this conversation. It's like, let's help each other all recognize each other's gifts. I'm pretty an intuitive person, and so I might just be able to pick up on things too that
Mm-hmm.
other people may not see. And if they don't see it, then they might think I'm crazy. And it's like, no, I'm able to put pieces together pretty easily. So, I figured this out without somebody telling me, kind of thing.
And that's something, if I can share this little nugget, I talk about this often with clients, and I was actually just talking about this with my sister yesterday. The hardest part about being someone that is intuitive, someone that can see that 4D, 5D, can read someone, is that often you're going to see something that the person in front of you is not aware of yet. They can't see it. They don't even know they're going through it. And so, what I've had to learn as I've grown up is that just because I see something doesn't always mean I should say it. Because what is objectively obvious to me is not objectively obvious to the person in front of me. Unless they're like a definite, obvious fellow sensitive, then I'll just like, I'll, if I know them well, I'll just speak freely. But usually I always ask permission. I always say, hey, I'm picking up on something. Would it be okay if I shared with you something I'm noticing about you? I kind of I have this gifting to be able to read into people. You may not be conscious of this. This might be a subconscious thing. Would it be okay if I've shared about this? Because especially for me, as I pick up on body and, emotion, and for you, like thoughts, people aren't always conscious of what's happening. And so if you just drop a bomb on them and say it in a really obvious fashion, like, well, of course you're feeling this right now, blah, 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 blah. And they're like, hold up, what? How dare you label me like that? Like, I'm not feeling that. And to you, you're like, oh, your entire body is saying that, is screaming that to me right now. Every nonverbal, every tone, every bit of the tone you're using, all of the word choice, like the energy you're giving off. I know that, like, without a doubt, they're in this certain state, but they haven't consciously become aware of it. And so it can be very disruptive and triggering for people where they get very defensive. And so I've learned that it's so important to remember that this gifting is a responsibility. And once you have that confidence to share, to be wary of oversharing and to learn when the timing is right and when someone is ready to receive and experience that gift, because it's not always a blessing to people if they're not ready. So there's that element too of the other side of the spectrum. There's the being shy and drowning. And then there's the other side where it's like, I have so much wisdom to offer you, but you're not ready for it yet.
Right. So you started to talk about the work that you do. Tell us about that.
Yeah.
What is the work that you do?
I am a natural sensitive health guide. So what that means in more practical terms is I help sensitives heal their bodies. I come from a background of functional nutrition. And so and have expanded upon that in many ways. But very similar, if any of your listeners are familiar with naturopaths or functional medical doctors, integrative doctors, I do all of that minus the prescribing. So I really help people identify the developed sensitivities that they have. I work specifically with sensitives. And so we identify what are the things that have come into your life that are not a part of your natural sensitivity, right? Because when you have sensory processing sensitivity, you have this foundation of sensitivity that will always be there. But then as you come into life, just like any human, we all have developed sensitivities. We experience trauma of different shades. We have light and heavy trauma, little t, big T trauma. We have also, I work in the health world. So I developed the term natural sensitivity because the term sensitivity is used so often to describe imbalance and something you need to clear and get rid of. Whereas HSP, highly sensitive person, the trait of sensory processing sensitivity is natural. It's innate. And so I call it that. I call it natural sensitivity. And then anything else is developed sensitivity that we do want to clear. So that's what I do in my practice is I help people identify what their developed sensitivities are, whether it's, a food sensitivity, a chemical sensitivity. And then really we look at how it's manifested. Is it into an autoimmune condition? Is it, prolonged depression and anxiety? Is it ADHD? I do a lot of neurotransmitter work. So I work with the brain a ton. So with that also comes a lot of just like emotional awareness and healing. And I love working with clients on a really individual basis. So I have a lot of different tools I use to make sure that we're matching their authenticity. I'm not a believer in having a protocol or an approach that I just slap on every single person. So very much based on data. I love labs. I'm a little nerd. but I also am very intuitive. So it's kind of a beautiful marriage of the two. And that's really where my gifting is, my sweet spot of gifting is being able to read people's bodies, but also have the lab work to back it up. And that's my favorite is when it's like, look, what I said, it's there. Because there's something so, especially for introverts, data is big, and being able to see something objective and like sit with it and marinate with it. It's really, really helpful. I've found. And I love doing testing and retesting. So we get to see the work we do together. A lot of work I do with diet, supplementation. I do really deep work too. So it's not just like changing a diet, but finding how you uniquely are meant to digest your food, for example. And that's not always through like a trendy diet, but also how you're here to sleep, how you're here to move through life. What is your ideal lifestyle for you uniquely? Like, what is David's unique, authentic lifestyle? Because if you live that way, a lot of your health problems will just fade away because there's simply messages from your body saying, this is inauthentic. This is not right for you. And so a lot of the things that we label as disease are really just the delayed or the ignoring of messages for years. And so if we start to respond to those messages and rebuild a life so that it matches how you're meant to live, how you were literally created and wired to live, those things start to fade and health just comes forward naturally, easily. And then sustainable health is not even a question. It's not, oh, I have to do this hard diet, for the rest of my life. It's no, this feels good. This feels easy. This is what I was meant to do. And so I always say, I'm simply inviting people to live differently and to live authentically, because oftentimes as sensitives, we have to live differently in this world because it's not really wired for us. At least in America where we live, especially me, I'm in Southern California. Like this is extrovert capital. This is like, I'm just hours away from LA. Like it's intense here. So we really do have to live differently and live authentically to how we're wired, not how our culture has told us to live.
Yeah. So how do you help people? So definitely you've been talking about the nutritional aspect of it, but
Mm-hmm.
also just coming to know your true nature and being in alignment with that. How does that contribute to your health and well-being?
Yeah. So I use a couple of different testings. So I have my own kind of intake forms I've created over the years to identify how someone's living. And then I love the system of human design, if you've heard of that, for helping to find someone's authentic blueprint is the term they use. But basically the way I see it is it's who you were created to be before all of the developed sensitivities came on. Another term for that is conditioning, before you were conditioned. And the reason I like it is that it's based off your birth. This is a bit woo woo. It's kind of like it's a marriage of like astrology and a few other things. But all I can say is it is the most accurate system I've ever experienced. And I'm very picky. I don't really like too many systems because I don't feel like they're granular enough. This is so granular, David. Like it's just so, so fun. So for deep thinkers, people that really like details, this is like a really impressive system. Um, and so other programs like Enneagram, Myers-Briggs, all these other things, they're based off of you in your inauthentic self, like rating yourself. So it's like, how can that be accurate? Like you're reading it from your conditioned self. Whereas this is based off like, this is just who you are. Boom. Like before all of the, pardon my language, but the shit hit the fan, you had all this stuff roll in. So I really like using that system as one of my routes to understand. I feel like it's very objective. And then again, my intuition within conversation, I have a very intimate experience with my clients. We meet every 2 weeks for a good amount of time, anywhere from an hour to 90 minutes. So it's really a lot of luxurious, luscious time to go deep. There's no rush. That's really important to me. And so I create a really just personal relationship with my clients. So through that space, we're able to get into the gold. We're able to get into those corners and those crevices and really understand what happened. I'm not a therapist, and I always am very clear about that. I have incredible referrals if anyone ever needs them. But I also am really good at like walking people through things. So if it's something that is safe and they feel comfortable, we'll talk through things or feel into things. Um, if we ever hit a deep block, I'll refer them out. But that also allows us to get in there because understanding how we hold emotions and what organ system is attached to that will show us and often guide us towards how we created a health imbalance. Perfect example with sensitives, we often have deep wells of anger and sadness. And most of us would not identify with that or want to claim that, but it's true because we've been rejected and misunderstood for most of our lives. And that is so frustrating to us because we just want to be known and loved. And so that gets buried in the liver. We also experience a lot of grief, and that gets buried in the lungs. So there's just these different places where we hold certain emotions and it gets expressed through symptoms. Like most sensitives I experience have liver gallbladder dysfunction, and that comes forward in different ways through digestive dysfunction, having, trouble with bowel movements, or having IBS, or having dysbiosis, which means pathogens overwhelming the gut, which looks like bloating or acne or brain fog or continual depression because serotonin is made in the gut. There's so many things that get linked in. And so my gifting and my job is to be your partner, to be that detective in your life that can say, hey, I'm hearing this. Let's explore. Let's dive in. Let's use lab work. Let's use symptoms. Let's use your health story. What did your childhood look like? Did your mom breastfeed? Were you on antibiotics for years and years and years? Did you recover this way or that way? If you're a child of the 80s, there's a lot that went down and a lot of things that shifted the body. And so even toxins, did you go to college? Did you live in a dorm room? Most likely you were exposed to mold and mycotoxins, and that's heavy on the body and overwhelms the liver. And there's so many layers. And so it's my job to be good at knowing the possibilities and helping you navigate when they're relevant, when they're not, when testing is helpful, when it's not. And each person is different. So it's my job to honor that process and to be in partnership. I don't believe in practitioners or doctors playing God. I'm very anti that. I don't pretend to know it all. I definitely don't. And often, what I try and teach my clients, not often, what I always try to teach my clients is that they know their body best, period. I'm learning from their body. I'm listening to their body. I'm helping them then interpret. I act as a temporary translator in a way. Like, let me help you hear what your body's saying. And then once you can listen and translate your own body's messages, you don't need as much help. And so my end goal is always to empower my clients to be able to tune into their body, to know what's going on. Then fear dissipates too. There's a lot of fear oftentimes with physical health imbalances. And it just gives you that ability to know who you are and to honor and to feel the subtle shifts, to know when you're in authenticity and out of authenticity. And that's what can keep you healthy long term and shows you who you're meant to be and who you're not. And that's big. That's everything. That's what everyone wants to know, right? Is who am I supposed to be? Why am I here? And how am I here to live? And that's really what I help people uncover. So it's health and nutrition, but it's so much deeper than that,
Yeah.
Typical
Yes.
introvert, right?
Yeah.
We can't stay shallow.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you for sharing all of that. You're also a fellow podcaster. What's the
I
name of your podcast?
am.
I've
It's
been
called
enjoying it.
Oh, thank you, David. That means the world. It's called the Authentic podcast. And yes, we have such wonderful guests on there. We talk about all things health. We also talk about just sensitivity in general, many different modalities and therapies and just tools to help you find your authenticity. And the term authentic calm is very meaningful for me. It means truly coming into that place of unique, restful ease. And that is where your body is whole, your body is healthy.
Absolutely. And so, here we are, a couple introvert podcasters. I think we're busting the myth that sometimes I hear people say that introverts don't have a lot to say, but I say the opposite. I'm like, we have a lot to say because we're always thinking, and
Yes.
it's so great to be able to share ideas with guests like this, and so that's another myth for you.
Myth busting
Myth
left and
busting,
right.
yeah, that's what we do. So we've talked a lot about a lot of great things about introversion, being highly sensitive, being an empath, the strengths of it all, the gifts. Is there anything else that we didn't talk about that you would like to?
I think just the last thing I would say would be to further emphasize how important it is to honor who you were created to be. This isn't just some trend. This isn't just some fun idea we're tossing around. This is who you were created to be. And there's a reason for that. I believe in free will, and I believe we choose our bodies and we choose who we're here to be. And that includes our personality, that includes our inborn traits. And if that's the case, then leaning away from things like introversion or sensitivity or your empathic abilities because a parent or a coach or someone in your life put you down for it is not just a disservice to you, it's a disservice to every single person you come in contact with because you are here on purpose. Nothing in my mind is an accident. And you are called to a higher purpose, and your introversion, your sensitivity, and your empathy are integral to that. So, if I can encourage anyone listening, it's to lean into those, to embrace them, whether the label or not, but the lifestyle, the the way that you choose to interact with people, the way that you choose to schedule, work, eat, breathe, sleep, let it honor those parts of you. And you will see so much fruit from that. You really will.
Very well said, Jessi. Thank you. And I know that all the things that we're talking about today, these gifts come to us very naturally because I've spent plenty of time trying to be something I wasn't. And
Mm.
it's not effective. It's draining. But when you can embrace who you are and the natural gifts that you have, it's a beautiful thing. So
Yeah, it
thank you
really
so
is.
much for being on today. Of
Yeah.
course, where can people find out more about the great work that you're doing?
Yes. So my website is marefluerwellness.com. That's Merfleur wellness. And I am occasionally on Instagram. I get spurts of energy and then I leave because I have to rebuild my energy. But I am there at Maryfloor Wellness as well. And then my podcast, as I said, is Authentic Calm. We have an Instagram. So if you want to follow, you can. But otherwise, we're on Apple and all the usuals. And then for those that any of you that my discussions on health, it's sitting with you and your body's asking for you to pay attention. I'd be honored to support you. I have two routes. I have something called the method, the Authentic Calm method, and that is for those that aren't ready to bring someone in. Maybe me talking about how personal it gets is a little scary. And that's okay. The method is there for you to empower yourself. I have it. It's a 5 week, I guess you call it a program in a way, but it's lifetime access. So you can go as slow as you want, as fast as you want. And the goal is to empower you and to give you the ability to reconnect with your body, to refresh yourself, and to be able to tune in to create your own rhythm, is what I call it, that matches your authenticity. And then ultimately to provide you with a whole library of sensitive, safe remedies, tools, therapies, tonics, modalities. And they're all just there for you. So if that sounds good, that's a wonderful way to start healing your body and clearing away some of the developed sensitivities. If you want more intimate help, maybe you're struggling with an autoimmune condition, you have some diagnoses, you're feeling really stuck and you want a partner, that is my one-on-one work. And it's very, very powerful. I'm getting better at boasting, but I'm really good at what I do, and I'm here for sensitives. I'm here to heal sensitives. So if that's you, like this is a good partnership, and I'd be honored to walk with you on your journey. So you can find all of that at marefluerwellness.com.
All right. Thanks so much, Jessi. And I will put all that information in the show notes too. So thank you for being on today.
Oh, my absolute honor. Thank you for having me, David.
Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to further connecting with you. Reach out at david@quietandstrong.com or check out the quietandstrong.com website, which includes blog posts, links to social media, and other items. Send me topics or guests you would like to see on the show. If you're interested in getting to know yourself better, there's now a free Type Finder personality assessment on the Quiet and Strong website. This free assessment will give you a brief report, including the 4-letter Myers-Briggs code. I'll add a link to the show notes. There's so many great things about being an introvert, so we need those to be understood. Get to know your introverted strengths and needs and be strong.